starting early. Definitely still want to remind everyone about the DoorDash. Go ahead and put in your order now and set it for a noon delivery, or just an immediate delivery, and that should arrive just before or right at noon. We will be breaking around noon to 12:10 or so to be able to take a bio break or go ahead and get to snacking. But good morning, everyone. I'm Jeremy Adams, Business Development Executive for Fulcrum Group, and thank you, everyone, for attending today's virtual Lunch and Learn Cybersecurity for CEOs. At the Fulcrum Group, we have a lot of rabid football fans, and so we're definitely jump into chat and share who your favorite team is and share what your favorite snack is when you're watching one of those games, and we'll take a tally of that. Currently, it looks like wings and nachos or potentially alcohol. But a quick introduction to the Fulcrum Group team members present. We have Steve Meek, who's our president, David Johnson, our vice president, Don Rogers, Mike Schmidt, and Ryan Young are our fractional CIOs, fractional chief information officers. We have Caitlin, who is our IT operations assistant, and then Chase Haley, who is our inside sales representative. I'd also like to introduce our event sponsors, Joey Badalament with Ingram Micro or Microsoft, and Mark Olinda with USI Insurance. Quick housekeeping, we're going to go ahead and mute everyone. Raise your hand if you do have a question, or best just to use chat, and we'll monitor that during the event to grab questions during the event and ask during the Q&As at the end of the presentation. So our first presentation starts next, followed by that break, and then our second presentation's around 12:10, and our final presentation's around the 12:35 to 12:40 timeframe. We also have an audience Q&A towards the end of this, and we're wrapping up a giveaway with 3 $100 Amazon gift cards. That should happen around 1:15 to 1:20. You must be present at the time to win one of the gift cards. So without further ado, our first presenter today is none other than David Johnson. He's a co-founder and vice president of the Fulcrum Group. And as vice president, David's responsible for sales and marketing strategy of the Fulcrum Group. He's a longtime cybersecurity expert and has worked with clients in several industries, including local government, healthcare, and finance. So David, would you like to take it away?
I am ready. Let's go. All right. So thanks, everyone, for all of the great chat about football and food. Now I'm hungry. And thanks, Jeremy, for the introduction. So today we're going to talk a little bit about cybersecurity, but we're going to talk about it from a big picture perspective. What every CEO should know about cybersecurity. And my goal today is to leave each of you with 3 actionable things that you can do immediately to improve your cybersecurity posture and reduce your business risk, which I think is important to all of us as business leaders. So let's take a look at our agenda for today. First we're going to start off with the latest cybersecurity events, how they happened, and look at some of those details. And then we're going to talk about what's at risk for small businesses and business owners. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the challenges for CEOs when it comes to cybersecurity. And then lastly, I'm going to give you those 3 action items that you can do now to improve your business's cybersecurity posture and reduce your risk. So let's go ahead and get started. All right. Has anybody ever seen one of these emails before? Looks like an email from your CEO. It says, I need 12 Apple iTunes gift cards for special recognition. Buy some $100 cards. When you get the cards, scratch them off and then email me the codes. It's urgent. I'm in the middle of a meeting. Don't call me. Those kind of things, right? It's been around for several years, and unfortunately, it's still fairly common. And we just recently heard of someone who had that happen to them. So this one should be relatively easy to spot by end users if they've had end user security awareness training. So we're always taking a look at that one. Other variations of email scams, some people use the term email phishing, are spear phishing, which a spear phishing email is a specific an email targeting a specific person. And then whaling, which is a type of spear phishing, but it's where it's targeting an executive or high wealth or individual. An example of whaling would be to target a CEO whose significant other posted vacation details on social media. And then the scammer would use those details to compose an email purportedly from the CEO to the CFO or someone else in the business saying something to the effect of, John, as you know, I'm on my way to the Bahamas and I'm just boarded the plane. I'm about to be unavailable for several days. Please pay the attached invoice ASAP. Payment details are included. The CFO wires the money, which will never be seen again. This is another one that's been around for a few years, but I hear a few instances of it working every year. If you'd like a copy of my book, Avoiding Email Attacks, reach out to me after this event and I'll be happy to mail you a copy. All right, next up, another oldie but goodie, ransomware. Ransomware is particularly effective for hackers because of the encryption or locking of your data. If you don't have good backups that you can rely on, you may be forced to pay the ransom to recover your files. Ransomware comes in many flavors, and we'll talk more in depth about some of the more nefarious types in the next couple of slides. So although these next two cyber attacks happened to local government agencies, they could just as easily have happened to a small or medium business. The first one we're going to talk about is a cyber attack on the DC Police Department back in April of this year through a ransomware infection. In this case, the cyber criminals weren't just satisfied with encrypting the DC police data and requesting a ransom. Instead, they added in a new wrinkle, extortion. The cyber criminals claimed to have stolen sensitive data, including the identities of confidential informants and background checks on department employees. The message was clear: pay the $50 million ransom or we'll release this sensitive data to major criminals, which could lead to DC police embarrassment or even loss of life. Imagine the potential lawsuits if a confidential informant were to be harmed as a direct result of the breach. Another cyber attack, the ransomware gang Abaddon threatened to leak department personal information and case files of the Dade City, Florida Police Department if the ransom wasn't paid. So it's safe to say that the simple ransomware attacks of old are no longer all that common. The average ransom amount has increased from a few $1,000s to now on average exceeding $170,000, with the added threat of extortion by leaking sensitive information if the ransom isn't properly paid. The cost of recovering from ransomware and other cyber attacks is increasing exponentially. Downtime can run into days or even weeks, and the cost of rebuilding systems and data can get into the tens of thousands of dollars. And the damage to your business's reputation could lead to client loss or even going out of business. And unfortunately, cyber criminals can be anywhere in the world and are often far out of reach of law enforcement. They have little concern about being caught, so they have become more brazen. No longer satisfied with just encrypting files and taking email systems offline, these cyber criminals are now impacting everything from 911 call centers to critical infrastructure. The Department of Homeland Security calls ransomware a threat to national security and said the issue is a top issue for the White House. Let's put ourselves in the shoes of a hacker for just a moment. Which would you prefer? Attacking one company at a time, or attacking a managed IT company and then infecting all of their clients with ransomware all at once? Hackers are a lot more sophisticated and patient than they were a few years ago. They understand that most businesses don't have the cybersecurity monitoring tools in place to identify cyber attacks when they occur, so that they know that they will likely have unfettered access for days or even weeks, where they can do things like disable antivirus and backups and exfiltrate data. This latest attack against customers of the software company Kaseya allowed the hackers to infect thousands of companies worldwide. Most of these companies were managed IT service providers who used Kaseya's hacked VSA software to manage their own customers. The Kaseya VSA software monitors customer networks and automates the installation of security updates and software. The attack was planned around the July 4th holiday weekend, knowing that many customers would have limited IT staffing. The hackers, known as Revel, offered a blanket decryption tool in exchange for $70 million. The hackers exploited a zero-day, previously unknown security vulnerability in the Kaseya software, which shows the level of sophistication in these attacks. The bottom line is that not only are the number of attacks increasing, but the sophistication and patience is increasing the risk for business owners. So now let's talk about what's at risk. For small and medium businesses, cybersecurity risk has increased exponentially over the past few years. Cyber criminals know that they can operate nearly without impunity or threat of being caught. There's a ton of financial risk, the cost of technology updates, legal fees, breach notification costs, recovering systems, cyber forensic investigations, and other costs can easily exceed $100,000 in the event of an attack. In the recent Kaseya attack, one of their customers was a grocery chain with over 800 locations. All 800 locations were closed for several days, resulting in millions of dollars of revenue lost. Becoming a victim of a cyber attack can also result in the loss of reputation, or even in a loss of the public's confidence in the business's leadership if data and systems can't be recovered quickly. Cyber attacks also put jobs at risk, so it's not just business owners who are affected. And the cost of recovery can be substantial. Downtime that runs for even days or even weeks. According to a recent survey from cybersecurity company Sophos, the average ransom paid in 2020 was $170,000. And of those that paid their ransom, only 65% of them were able to recover any amount of their data. And the average cost of remediating a ransomware attack more than doubled to $1.85 million. SMB CEOs have many challenges when it comes to cybersecurity. We've had many discussions with CEOs and other business leaders over the past few years, and we hear a common refrain: cybersecurity is a responsibility of IT. This is a dangerous mindset, as cybersecurity efforts have the most success when business leadership leads the charge. We're starting to see a changing trend, primarily due to the increased risk. Now, when we look at internal IT, it's not fair to look for them to be cybersecurity experts. A typical small business has one IT person for every 50 to 75 employees. And in the world of day-to-day IT operations, there are many hats to wear, such as end user support, network infrastructure support, vendor management, making sure all the backups and patching and antivirus is all done and completed, budgeting, planning, amongst other hats. And that's all before you get to cybersecurity. So as an individual IT person, wearing those many hats makes it very difficult to develop cybersecurity skills. Third-party outsourcing and MSPs may be better equipped to handle cybersecurity, but typical managed IT outsourcing contracts only include what I would refer to as basic cybersecurity. They include things like Windows patching, antivirus management. They might review your user permissions on the network, but more comprehensive cybersecurity solutions aren't included unless you pay more. Now, when it comes to your actual cybersecurity, your end users are still your greatest weakness. Phishing attacks, social engineering attacks, compromised credentials on the dark web, and data leakage are just a few of the threats facing end users. Most SMBs still don't require their end users to take annual security awareness training or subject them to email phishing simulations or even provide them and enforce the proper cybersecurity policies. The best cybersecurity in the world can be defeated by an end user clicking on a phishing email. Another big challenge is related to the increase in IoT devices. We are now seeing all types of devices now being connected to the network. Everything from IP surveillance cameras to door access readers, thermostats, audio-visual systems, and more. Without the proper security in place, these devices can provide an easy attack vector into your networks for cyber attackers. And last but not least, most SMBs lack much in the way of cybersecurity policies, IT policies, and the few policies that they do have are often not followed. So now we're going to talk about the 3 actionable things that every CEO should do now to ensure that their cybersecurity posture is in line with their preferred risk level. Like most things in a small business, leadership works in a top-down fashion. If the CEO thinks cybersecurity is important, then your managers and end users will also think it's important. Before you can build a cybersecurity program, you need to understand your organizational risks. Starting with a risk assessment helps you understand what are the cybersecurity threats you face and what are your most critical assets, which will allow you to focus your limited cybersecurity budget on those assets that are most critical. It's also a smart idea to understand any compliance requirements that you might have, whether that's PCI, HIPAA, or other compliance. I do have some bad news for you. Putting in the right tools and processes for cybersecurity isn't cheap. And there's no guarantee that any cybersecurity solutions that you put in place will stop every threat. But as a business leader, cybersecurity should be about reducing the risk to your business to an acceptable level. It's also a good idea to carry cyber insurance. There are different types of cyber insurance coverage, and there are a lot of big changes coming down the pipeline. Our friends at USI Insurance will be talking cyber insurance in the next presentation, so be ready for that. And it's not just enough to make cybersecurity a priority, you've got to lead by example. Follow the procedures that your team members have to follow. This will make it harder for cyber attackers to use you as an attack vector. Another critical point is for your team to perform annual disaster recovery and incident response testing. And make sure that adjustments are made to both, as your situation will change from year to year. And finally, give your IT leader a seat at the executive table. Involve IT in business planning so that they can help you proactively plan out your IT and cybersecurity needs. Step 2. Now that you've established yourself as the business leader who embraces cybersecurity, you can move on to this next step, verifying that your IT team is handling the cybersecurity basics. Every small business should have these basics, no exceptions. The first up is Windows patching. As the business leader, you work from the concept of trust but verify. Don't take IT's word for it. Make sure that you are receiving reports that show your patch status and antivirus status for all of your organization's PCs and servers. Missing patches and missing antivirus are attack vectors for cyber criminals. Now that work from home is a big part of most small businesses, it's critical that cybersecurity for remote workers not be given the short shrift. These users should be given a corporate-owned and managed computer that adheres to the same cybersecurity rules as users in the office. If you've got users who are using their own home personal computer, you're opening up your network to big cybersecurity risks. Annual end-user security awareness training should probably be number 1 on this list, as end users are still the number 1 cybersecurity weaknesses. It should also include regular phishing simulations, and a good training program should include reports on who has completed the training and who has clicked on phishing email simulations. If your firewall is older than 3 years old, it is likely missing some of the more advanced cybersecurity capabilities, such as cloud sandboxing. Upgrading to the latest firewalls can significantly improve your perimeter security. If your organization is still running Office 365, E3, or Microsoft 365 standard subscriptions, you're likely missing out on some of the more advanced cybersecurity features that are available in Microsoft 365 Business Premium or E3. Our friends at Microsoft will talk more about Microsoft 365 after lunch. Mobile devices such as laptops and tablets should have their storage encrypted so that they are lost or stolen. The data on these devices can't be accessed. A good asset tracking system with detailed reporting can help not only with cybersecurity, but also can help you with budgeting as well. And the number 1 way you can reduce email attacks is to implement multi-factor authentication. We highly recommend multi-factor authentication not only for email, but also to protect your Windows login as well as all your cloud applications. And no cybersecurity program can guarantee that you won't suffer an attack and have your data lost, stolen, or encrypted with ransomware. So having off-site disaster recovery is a must. Okay, now that you have your action plan for steps 1 and 2, let's get started on step 3, getting to know some of the more advanced cybersecurity tools out there. Everyone knows antivirus, but there's a new sheriff in town when it comes to endpoint protection, and that term is called Endpoint Detection and Response, or EDR. And it's a new approach to endpoint security that will likely replace antivirus almost certainly within the next year. The dirty little secret about both internal IT teams and outsourced IT is that basic cybersecurity means that no one is watching or monitoring your cybersecurity 24/7. This means that if a cyber attack manages to breach your network, it could be days, weeks, or even months before the attack is discovered. Managed Detection and Response, or MDR, is a 24/7 security operations center as a service where your event logs and other entry points to your network are monitored 24/7, and you are alerted if there is an intrusion or breach. If your business doesn't provide smartphones to your end users, you might want to consider using MFA tokens as the additional factor instead of personally owned smartphones. We are seeing many end users increasingly refusing to install corporate-owned software applications on their personal smartphones. Does your business have a third-party accounting firm audit your financials? Regular penetration and vulnerability assessments act as an audit for your cybersecurity posture. Don't just trust that your IT team or managed IT provider is protecting you. And implementing ransomware protection practices can help avoid ransomware attacks on the front end and help recover in the event of a ransomware attack. Strategies such as using a Linux-based backup appliance, using AI and machine learning to detect suspicious patterns, utilizing a backup solution that has built-in ransomware protections, or even utilizing a backup solution that has a true air gap could help protect you against ransomware. And of course, as we talked about earlier, having an off-site disaster recovery solution can help you recover in the event of a true disaster, whether that's ransomware or a fire, flood, or tornado. All right, we've covered a lot in our first presentation. So let's recap what we talked about. So first off, there's no doubt that cybersecurity threats continue to increase, and the impacts are increasing as well. The risks are increasing too, as potential loss of revenue and cost of recovery increase. So as the leader of a small business, there are challenges to overcome, starting with yourself and recognizing other weaknesses in your organization. And then remember our 3-step plan. Step 1, as the leader, embrace cybersecurity by educating yourself about the risks and threats, and then lead by example. Step 2, make sure your business has the cybersecurity basics down. Don't be the business that gets compromised because your servers were missing a patch or your firewall is 10 years old. And step 3, start educating yourself on the advanced cybersecurity tools that are out there. You never know when the threats are going to escalate and require more advanced protections than what you currently have. All right. We covered a lot. Thanks for listening. Let's see if we got some questions. Anybody want to pop in and read a few off to me?
Jared was asking earlier, can you comment on current DDoS attack on VoIP upstream providers?
Well, I think, any type of network connectivity like VoIP or those kind of solutions that happen over the public internet are susceptible to the same types of threats and risks that other technologies are, can happen to. So, you can spend more money and put that on a private network and reduce that risk, but you'd have to spend more money to make that happen. Jared, does that answer your question? All right. What else? Any other questions that come up?
Didn't see any others during this presentation. We had one about cybersecurity insurance, so we can wait on that. And then Yolanda had one beforehand. Is there any legislation pending to make hackers accountable in the United States?
I think that's a great question. I talk to business owners, city managers, and executive directors of nonprofits, and that's a big concern for leadership out there. And I think, in my view, the laws just haven't really kept up. Steve, do you have some thoughts about that?
I'm sorry, could you rephrase the question?
I was just talking about the fact that many cyber attackers are out of the reach of the U.S. Laws and those kind of things. How things are not keeping up. Do you think there's going to be anything that might come down the pike that might help us? Any legislation or other laws?
The big legislation that's out there right now is all around privacy. Each state is pursuing different avenues for privacy. For that state, I think the states are actually going to struggle with that for a while. And I think that something national is going to come out, but that's still going to be down the road. I think we'll still get peppered with some stuff. Texas actually has its own legislation that's out there and being reviewed. There's a gentleman here in the area, not too far from our office, that I had an in-depth conversation about with that, and he's on that committee that they're working on it. But getting a consensus is always tough. Beyond that, obviously the federal government's pursuing CMMC, which is a standard for the federal side, and President Biden has went out and issued. There's a really good document from the White House that I can share. I'll just have to track it down, but he put a missive out to corporations about how to improve their cybersecurity posture and things to be aware of in regards to critical infrastructure. And a lot of the things out of that letter are probably fairly similar to the things that you've talked about here. Some of the first parts of CMMC and shared things from implementation group 1 of the CIS security standard. So I think that as there's more publicity and more information out there, then it's going to make more sense for organizations to pick up those pieces that make sense at that time and just chip away at it a little bit at a time. No one's got unlimited budget, so you usually can't bite off on all of it, but you can chip away at it, one bite at a time, and evolve into the level that you hope to have.
Okay, awesome. Laverne asked, are there different considerations for Apple Macs? I would say, Laverne, the Apples, the Macs have not been as attacked as prevalently as Windows devices, and I think a lot of that is due to the fact that the percentage of computers in the business world are highly in favor of the Windows devices, but we still recommend a lot of the same precautions as I think the thing I've noticed over the years is that Windows and Mac keep getting closer and closer together. They start looking more like the same technologies. So making sure that you're monitoring those devices, that you've got antivirus, that you're keeping them up to date with the latest versions of the software, and then being able to report and manage those. All right, let's see. Any other questions come up?
I actually had one from one of our early events. I think Steve had made a comment that as far as remediation after event, it's typically running at 50 times the cost it takes to avoid an event or to prevent one. I was curious if that number has changed at all, or if that's still about the same correlation.
Well, I think, Sophos in their report reported that and this was from 2020, reported that the average cost to remediate a cyber incident is as $1.85 million. So pretty good chunk of change. And that's, all the cost associated with it. So, I think, that we're going to hear from our friends at USI here in just a bit about changes that are coming in the cybersecurity world. So there's going to be an increased risk for business owners and leaders. So I don't think those costs are going to go down for sure.
Got it. Awesome. Well, we are definitely running early, but to be on schedule, we'll just stay on what looks to be a current break. Ideally, lunch is arriving, so feel free to dig into that or check on that. But let's take about a 10 to 15 minute break, and then we'll have Mark come on at around the noon time frame. Is that fair?
Yeah, let's make it. Why don't we make it 11:55, Jeremy, so we can maybe get
Okay.
everybody out and back to their real job here in a little bit early if we can. So.
All right, let's break for 9 to 10.
I'm going to introduce Mike Nielsen with USI, and then he's going to introduce Mark. So we're going to
Awesome.
We're going to give them the double introduction here. So Mike, take it away.
Fantastic, David. Thank you so much. And thanks to our friends over at Fulcrum Group for allowing us to participate in this presentation today. Some of the information that's been presented has already been fantastic, and look forward to getting copies of the slides. Great reminders and great information about what's going on in the cybersecurity space. And we're happy to talk a little bit about that today. Just a little bit about USI. Mark, if you got the controls, you could flip to the next slide. So before I introduce Mark Lindo, just a little bit about USI and who we are. I've already told you my name, Mike Nielsen, and I'm a property and casualty practice leader here in the Dallas and Fort Worth office of USI. We are, this slide that's posted currently is actually just a little bit dated. We're actually the #1 largest privately held broker in the United States. That says second place, but we have overtaken that. We are now the largest privately held broker in the country. Puts us at about the fifth largest broker overall that operates in the nation. We have about 8,000 employees. That number continues to grow, and we crested over $2 billion in revenue just at the end of 2020 and moving into Q1 of this year. So just in our region alone, we have over 800 employees, so about 10% of our entire staff operates in this region. And in the Dallas-Fort Worth market, we got about 140 professionals that work in this space. Our revenue has crested $55 million just in the Dallas and Fort Worth or North Texas offices. And so we're very proud of that. We're very proud of our growth. And a large part of that is because of our focus and our ability to be specialists. So we definitely have credibility to be in this space and credibility to talk with you about your insurance needs. And coming from myself, I was a claims guy before I got started in actual sales and being recruited to join USI. And I've been a property and casualty practice leader locally here for 2 years. But before that, I was a claims professional. And that's how I started my career. And it's just interesting to see how claims have kind of migrated from one focus to the next. And when I first started my career, Hurricane Andrew hit back in '92. And obviously, one of the most important things that CEOs and the C-suite was concerned about was property and casualty, and who's going to protect your building and your roof and fire suppression systems, et cetera. And that has totally migrated now into this cyber arena that we're in. And USI has recognized that, and so we went out and hired actual professionals that specialize in this space. So we recognize that as the risks change and the things that should be top of mind for you on your desk, we have to change as well. And the insurance industry has to change. A lot of the things that David talked about in his presentation and the amount of cost that can be expended when you're trying to protect yourself from these risks. One of the features is you actually have the ability also to transfer that risk into an insurance policy. And And there are various ways to do that, and there's a lot of differences between one policy to the next. And Mark's going to dive into that a little bit. Mark comes to us from the carrier side of the house, and he was an underwriter for many years. I was part of the senior leadership team that actually was recruiting Mark, and so I got to interview him several times, and very grateful that he made a decision to join our firm. But Mark specializes in the executive line space, and that includes D&O, or directors and officers coverage, employment practices liability, and especially cyber insurance and cybersecurity. So part of his goal and part of his task is to be on top of the cybersecurity market, making sure that we understand the changes and make sure that we understand also the carriers who have protection against the changes as they come their way. And Mark has very deep relationships with all of our carrier partners. And so without further ado, it's my privilege to introduce Mark Galindo. And Mark, you can take it away.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, David. Really appreciate being on this panel and being able to provide this presentation today. Just real quickly, so I can't see the chat, so I can't see questions come in. So if you guys can ping me and let me know as questions come up, or we can wait till the end, whichever works best. And I can't see your faces either, so I'm just going to ride with this as we go. But please, definitely, if you have questions, put them in the chat. Let's make this as interactive as possible. Before I get into, my purpose of what I want you guys to take away today, I do want to just kind of give you a little bit more, expand on what Mike was saying. So, I am part of what we call the Executive Professional Solutions resource team. There's 40 of us across the country. And one of the unique aspects of USI and how we operate is there's 3 of us in our Texas region, but we collaborate with our colleagues across the US on a daily basis, especially as this cyber market evolves and becomes, what we term hard. It's a little bit more complex. It's a little bit more hurdles to jump over to get proper terms and conditions from carriers. So we're constantly collaborating with each other to make sure we're bringing the best for our clients in every corner of the US. So with that said, I wanted to kind of dive into, there's a couple areas of my agenda that I want you to take away. One, from a very high level, just to kind of give you a broad overview, what is a cyber insurance policy? What are you buying? What are the core triggers, things of that nature? How does it work mechanically? And really why you should buy it. Once we kind of dive into that, I want to kind of talk about the market and talk about why the market is the way it is. And a lot of it is gonna dovetail from David's comments. There's going to be a lot of talk around ransomware, talk about some just basic controls that, carriers want to see. And at the end, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the top 5 areas of focus of care from carriers. We're going to talk about, what it's going to look like when you engage USI to sit down and talk about, transferring your cyber risk to buy a policy. Here's some of the questions we're going to go. So we're going to simulate that process, and then we're going to talk about what you need and what that process looks like in order to secure the best terms and conditions. So first, let's talk about some misconceptions about cyber insurance. Cyber insurance has been around for a while. As Mike alluded, I've been on the carrier side. I worked for Beasley since 2014. Beasley is one of the more pioneers, if you will, from the cyber perspective. Just 2 to 3 years ago, I would say those were kind of like the high flying days of basically all we needed was 3 data points from our clients. And then we were able to provide a really robust cyber policy, minimal underwriting, if you will. But as anything, as claims evolve and claims get, worse over time, the underwriting process gets a little bit more constrained. The demand gets a little bit more, it gets higher. The carriers have to get more resources. So we're at a point where there's a huge focus in the cyber insurance market because there's a lot of clients that are looking to transfer this risk. So the first one is nothing is covered. Well, just kind of piggybacking on what I just said, if I could show you a diagram a little bit more at a later time where, if you look at ransomware claims from Q4 2019 to Q2 of 2021, it's up 400%. Where all other claims with regard to data breach, and we'll just call all other, is pretty much is up like 10%. So and we'll talk a little bit about this a little bit later, but ransomware doesn't correlate with a sector, a size. Ransomware is ransomware. And so, claims are up across the board and carriers are paying losses. So so we just debunked that, right? So, the policy does work as carriers are starting to see that they're paying claims. They're actually paying more claims than the revenue, that the premium that they're getting in. So they have to recalibrate their underwriting process. And this is why it's a little bit more intense. This is why premiums have gone up. This is why they're restructuring the limits and retention structures to properly recalibrate to the claims environment that we're currently in. The other one is, I'm not in a high risk industry: healthcare, financial services, retail, education. Again, ransomware is going to be the big thing right now, because that's, we talk a lot about severity and frequency. Frequency is, we typically see a lot of claims throughout the year, right? You get hit with a lot of them, but they're small in claim size as far as payout. Well, that's changed over the last years. Ransomware has become a business for these cyber criminals. These cyber criminals have really gotten sophisticated. They've really banded together. They've really kind of figured out it's a business for them. And they've gotten smart, and they don't delineate between sectors. So this hits all areas of the spectrum. Whether you're a municipality, whether you're a for-profit retailer. Now there's some aspects with healthcare and retail that we can get into a little bit later on with PCI and credit card exposure. However, ransomware is ransomware. A cyber criminal can come in, take the keys to the kingdom, and say, give me a certain amount of money if you want to get access to your system again. So the next one is, my company is too small for criminals. Sorry. Again, I just kind of mentioned this earlier. It doesn't delineate between size. We've seen, 25 million revenue companies, 10 million revenue companies get hit or have a ransomware situation where the ransom is excess of $2 million. Right? And so it doesn't delineate. I do not take credit cards, or we pay a third party to process our credit card transactions. Yes, that is an exposure that you got to be, cognizant of. And I think David kind of went a little bit through that in his presentation. PCI is an area that has an exposure. However, the human element, as David mentioned earlier, is still one of the top concerns from an insurance perspective, because, us humans, sometimes we can be careless. We fall victim of phishing emails that David kind of mentioned earlier. And I think somebody in the chat mentioned somebody, $400,000 to $400,000. We leave our laptops and our iPads that have access to our corporate systems, at the soccer field or whatever, and that gets taken. So if you don't have the proper controls in place, that somebody could take that and use it to their advantage. So yes, credit card is an exposure, but it's just one component of many exposures that we're looking at from a cyber perspective. I know our controls are inadequate, so nobody will cover us anyhow. There's a little bit of truth to that, but then for the most part, it's not, because as an industry where we've evolved, we really want to partner with you, the client, the end buyer. If you're not at an adequate place for controls, we want to partner with you and the Fulcrums of the world to really put a robust plan in place, help you identify your gaps, help you identify your weak spots, and then help you understand, here's what we need to see from an insurance perspective for a minimal adequate controls to give you the best terms and conditions. Now, we'll probably, as a consultant, for cyber insurance, we'll go out there and we'll find you coverage. It may be limited and it may be not as robust, but we'll find you coverage and we'll say, okay, here's the plan that you need to do. Work with Fulcrum Group to get up to speed, get these controls adequate, and then you'll be a better risk overall. Okay, so let's talk about the policy, right? So you buy a cyber policy. What did you actually buy? So there's two components of the cyber policy. There's a first-party component and there's a third-party component. First, let's dive into the first-party component. So I want to just kind of dive into the core insuring clauses within the first-party agreement in the policy, and there's 5 of them, right? And you can see here. So the first big one is cyber extortion. This is ransomware. This is exactly what that is. Somebody, gains access to your system. They get the keys to the kingdom. They shut it down. They extort that. They say, we have sensitive data. We can leak that if you don't pay us $2 million in Bitcoin. And that coverage is going to pay for that. So it's going to be a reimbursement of payment for ransomware related extortion forensic cost. The second one is breach response and crisis management. This is just covers the cost to respond to a data breach. There's a lot that goes into once a data breach happens there's a lot of things you have to do after the fact, right? You need to get a proper forensics done. What actually happened? Where was the gap? You got to notify all the affected parties. There's a cost associated with that. And then you got to monitor. And so that all takes time, money, and expertise that comes at a cost. And this insurance clause this portion of the policy is the bucket that will respond to that. Now, as business leaders, you've all heard of business interruption. You probably heard about it from the context of, if there's a hurricane or if there's a bad, hailstorm or windstorm, tornado, that can take down my warehouse and I can't operate. They took down the warehouse, I can't operate for a month at minimum till we're back up and running, until we get the proper. This is the same concept, but in a digital world, right? So, this is where somebody comes in, shut down your system. You can't operate, you can't do business. You can't do business because you don't have the proper system in place to operate, especially if you're decentralized and you have multiple locations throughout a geography. And so this portion of the policy reimburses for lost net income associated with extra expense resulting from a total or partial interruption. Again, this is a cyber attack, security breach, system failure, unexpected outage. And that's the piece that would respond to that. But then you also have a dependent business interruption. We're all interconnected, right? And so you have multiple vendors that you utilize to help do your business. But what if your vendor system gets shut down and they can't do business? So those orders that you had coming in the next month, now they can't come because their system is shut down and they can't get access. So now you're backed up. So this policy will then respond to that. It will respond to those costs associated and those extra expenses associated to get back over and to make you whole. And lastly, from a first party perspective, this is data restoration. It's basically the cost associated with restoring your wipe out your hardware, and you need to get it back up and running to where it was a pre-breach. This cost is associated with that. So let's talk a little bit about the third component, the second component, which is third-party insurance agreements. So just a quick little, summary. So third party is basically liability you owe to somebody else, right? So it's not first party is yourself, third party is outwardly. And there's 4 insurance agreements on the third party piece. And this is what you typically would see in a third party insurance agreements. So the first one is going to be your security and network privacy liability. So this one gets a little bit more socialized and popularity with, you think of like your Home Depot, your TJ Maxx, when they got a security breach. That's what this is talking about. Where they come in, somebody takes information from the third party, your client's customers' information, and they want to disclose that. And there's also transmission of malicious code, virus attacks, denial of service attacks. So this insuring clause would respond to that aspect of it. The second one is a privacy regulatory defensive penalties. And basically, it's just kind of, it is what it is. There's also a regulatory standpoint from a regulatory body who's going to impose fines and penalties if you don't, if any situation that's related to a cyber attack that they find that you were in violation of. Media liability, this is basically any content that you put online that alleges that is in violation to copyright and trademark infringement. There's also a libel and slander component and personal injury component. Typically, a lot of these cyber policies will have this coverage in there, but it's not a big focus. If your organization has a higher media liability exposure, we as insurance professionals would ask, just take that out and buy a separate policy. But typically this is included. And then lastly, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but the payment card industry. So PCI, this is, where you're in violation of not being in compliant with PCI, and there's all these fines and penalties and assessments levied on you, and then this policy will reimburse you for those costs. So that's first party and third party. So if you think about the insurance policy, it's going to give you a limit of it's going to give you a limit for coverage, right? So when you look at your policy, it's going to say, this policy is going to give you 2 million limit, and 2 million limit will be for each insuring clause, and each will have its own deductible or self-insured retention. And so that's kind of the mechanics of it. Sometimes if a carrier feels like there's a higher exposure in one area, they may limit that limit. They may bring it down to, let's say, 1 million with a higher retention. Typically, again, 2-3 years ago, before the invasion of ransomware and all the explosion of it, it was pretty easy to get 10 million of limits for first and third party. But nowadays that's pretty tough. Typically carriers are limited to 5 million, and sometimes, lower than that, depending on your controls. So let's talk a little bit about some of the added benefits of a cyber policy. So if you really think about what a cyber policy is, at its core, it's a service-led policy, right? So yes, you're going to have those insurance agreements, and it's going to trigger if you have an incident, and then the carrier will pay, and yada yada. But what these cyber policies are really known for, and why they're so popular, is because all the added services that come with it, right? And so we talked about this earlier. David mentioned, post-breach costs. I think you mentioned upwards to 1.5, 1.8 million, where pre-breach costs are a fraction of that, right? 175,000, I think you said, or 200,000. So that's where we want to come. We want to partner with you. We want to sell you this policy, right? Of course, but we also want to work with you to make you a better risk. And there's components to a lot of these cyber policies that offer services. Each carrier partners with different vendors, but there's services that you could take advantage of. That's part of the policy, part of the premium that you currently buy. And, a lot of insurers, a lot of clients have taken advantage of this. One of the things that's very popular right now, and it helps from an underwriting perspective for these carriers, but really kind of helps you identify some of your gaps, is vulnerability scans. That's a great way to see, just kind of say, hey, we see all this stuff and these deficiencies, and this is why we can't give you the most robust policy and premium. There's also, they'll help you, from a training aspect, phishing simulations. There's also tabletop exercises, and really help you working with the likes of Fulcrum Group to really create an incident response plan, right? A breach response plan. Because that's step one. We got to get a plan in place, but after you get the plan, kick the tires. stress test it. Does it work? Do we need to tweak it? I think David mentioned that earlier. It's like every year, reassess it. Do we need to change it? As your company grows, your needs from a cybersecurity perspective are going to evolve. And a lot of these policies have these services. So, that's where we come in as professionals, is we identify some of the best carriers that have the best services that align with your company, your size, your sector, so on and so forth. And the last point there is like, this doesn't, just like anything, right? It doesn't guarantee you're not going to be a victim of an event, but it will mitigate. It'll help you become more aware. It could be part of your overall enterprise risk management process, and you'll be better, have better controls in place to kind of mitigate these actions going forward. So let's talk about the market, which has been a really just like a roller coaster ride, if you will, over the past 2 years. And this first slide is really just kind of high level snapshot. There are over 100 policy forms in the market, different carriers, but just like anything, you have your major players, you have your mid majors, and then you have your specialties. And because of all the demand of cyber insurance, because of the risk profiles have gone up, ransomware has exploded. There's been a lot of new entrants from a financial tech perspective, but also, we have new entrants that all they do is cyber. And so there's plenty of really robust carriers out there with some good policies in place. But what we've identified is some carriers are better suited for certain businesses in certain sectors or certain size. And that's where we know our market, so that's where we would come in to help you identify that. Again, I've kind of been beating this drum. Claims are on the rise. Ransomware is at its all-time. Again, it's a frequency issue. It's a severity issue. When I was at Beasley, I think the largest ransomware demand that I knew about was over 40 million. But of course, with proper negotiations, brought that down. So it's out there. Ransomware is a huge deal. Every underwriter, is requiring a supplemental ransomware application in addition to the typical cyber application. That's how big of a focus it is. And we'll talk a little bit about the top 5 areas of concern, but we'll get into more of that. And then rate increases are here, and I'll say, and they're steady. We're not at the apex. I think we're going to continue to see this trend upwards for certain sectors. And, I think as an industry, we all kind of doing more stuff like this to educate everybody to help be better risk is only going to stabilize that. But rate increases are here, which it's a recognition that carriers are paying claims and they have the right size of their book to get more premium to pay those claims. So how do we what's our process, right? How do you obtain coverage? First of all, contact us and we'll walk through the process as far as timing. When do we start the process as far as doing assessment of your current controls, looking at filling out the applications. One of the things that we bring value from a USI perspective is a lot of us have been underwriters like myself. So we can pre-underwrite your company, and along with all this other stuff, we can tell you, okay, here's what we think. Here's some areas I think you would need to beef up or become or have the controls a little bit more adequate to get better terms and conditions. And then we also have dedicated cyber claims expertise advocates. So when you do have a claim, right, you do have an event and we have a policy in place, we have advocates across the country that can help through the process. You're not alone with that. We can, we'll walk with you through that process. We'll make sure you get the best outcome given the situation. Complete submission materials. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the next slide, so I'm going to skip that. And then understand your options. This is where we scour the market per your risk, and we're going to bring various options from a limit, retention, terms and conditions standpoint, premium, of course, And, where we say, okay, our recommendation or our opinion is these are the coverages that I would recommend for you going forward. And of course, there's the pre-breach offerings that I talked about earlier. So the next 2 slides, I want to get into the top 5 cyber underwriting focuses areas in 2021. Really, if you had to boil down the current insurance market and from an underwriter perspective, it really boils down to these 5 key things. And a lot of it David went through. And I'll tell you, I'll give you a little bit of the dynamic that we're facing, right? So with the explosion of ransomware, with the explosion of demand for cyber insurance, typically carriers had, they didn't have robust cyber underwriting teams. So they had to go out and staff. And they didn't have, you really couldn't pick a lot of, individuals that had a lot of expertise in the market because it was more of a niche area. So what they did is what you saw on a general perspective is they juniorized their staff. So they brought in younger folks, trained them up to be cyber underwriting experts. Now that creates a little bit of a log itself. So if you think about the process, these underwriters are getting inundated with submissions. And so I give you that little bit of background because we're at a point where some of the key players are telling us if they don't have any of these 5 things and are adequate, don't even send it in. Like we're not even going to entertain that risk. So that's how important this is, right? And so we talked about multi-factor authentication. And there's some variations of it you can kind of see on the right. And this is where David and his group really can to help out. But this is a key thing. And, sometimes it's just, you just enable it, right? It could be, low cost. Sometimes it's not, but, but that's one of the key areas where you just have to have in place in order to get any decent coverage if you want to transfer your risk. Endpoint detection, EDR, David talked about that too. And so this is, if I just take a quick step back, this is when we sit down, this is some of the questions we're going to go through, right? We're going to ask you, what's your multi-factor authentication? We're going to run through these questions. And same thing for EDR, do you have it in place? Does it utilize entire network? If not, why not? And this is kind of the assessment we're going to walk through with you when we start the process to secure the best terms and conditions from a cyber perspective. 24/7 network monitoring, network backups. We're going to get into the details of what type, frequency, location, offsite, co-location, air grab. And the last thing is network segmentation. So the EOL, end of life, is such a big deal right now. But you can see some of the other questions on here. Critical system segmentation in place. So this is kind of the process. This is the level of detail we want to work with you on to make sure, because we know the underwriters are seeing this. They've gotten very sophisticated in understanding the cyber world and the kill chain from a ransomware perspective and other areas of exposures. But these are the main areas of focus. And if these aren't adequate for your organization, it's going to be tough to get you a decent policy in place. Last slide here before we start taking some questions is, what do I need to bring to the table? And so if you have a cyber policy currently in place, great. We'd love to work with you on how we can evolve that and make it more robust. But basically we would want to look at your current policy, right? And then secondly, you'll need your most recent audited financials. If you don't have audited financials, interim financials are fine. And then a copy of the organization structure with ownership. But if you don't have a policy in place, we'd have to go through an assessment, basically understanding your cyber threats, kind of what I was talking about earlier, where are your gaps, and what are the underwriters going to want to see. So that's through an application process that will uncover some of that, and we can walk that through with you. And then again, incident response plan or breach response plan, we'd want to see that in place. And if you don't have one in place, then we can definitely work with you and also with the Fulcrum Group to help craft something. And then the last thing is the most recent audited financials. So that is my content. I'm not sure how I'm doing on time, but I think I'm right on. I'll open it up for some questions. And again, I can't see the chat. I'm going to take this out.
We just got a question up for you.
Okay.
Mark, Lee Johnson asked, how would you respond to the charge that cyber insurers opt to pay ransoms instead of remediation costs in most cases, leading to the accelerated proliferation of ransomware and consequently an increase in rates?
Yeah, that's a good question. And thanks for sending that over. I mean, the short answer, it depends on the situation. You know, a lot of it is there's a reputational component to it. So, you know, working with you, the carriers will say, okay, look, we could just pay this. But then there's another aspect of it. And I'll give you a quick story. And I hope this is answering your question. If it doesn't, please let me know. But, you know, when I was on the Beasley side, on the carrier side, we had an insured that had an $80,000 ransom demand, and they decided to pay it on their own. Well, you know, 3 months later, Homeland Security knocks on their door and says, hey, why did you pay ISIS an $80,000 payment? You know, so not knowing their small business, they didn't quite understand, they didn't get it. So that's kind of why, you know, working with the carriers, forensic advisors, identifying who these bad actors are, if they're sanctioned, how to navigate through that. But yeah, I mean, it really depends on the situation and, you know, and what the additional cost is. You know, if it's easier to pay and, you know, you do a cost benefit analysis and, you know, it's the best route is to pay instead of not paying and dealing with business interruption ongoing, then that would be the path that they would go forward.
And I think, you know, Mark, if I think of it as, you know, it's insurance carriers definitely want to get to the point where they're not paying ransom, right?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, as an industry, and this is a very holistic comment, as an industry, the insurance carriers, all of them are saying the same thing. Basically, they want to help clients become better risk because, you know, and they've kind of equated it back to, Mike kind of alluded to this earlier, is, you know, back from a property perspective, you have your warehouse, you know, if you don't have fire suppression, sprinkler system, locks on the door, you know, you're not going to get great insurance because you're not securing your property. It's the same thing. If you don't lock it down. So the industry is really wanting to help them become better risk, to secure their network, to wall off some of these bad actors. And that's where we're going to. So nobody said we're out. Like it's not insurable anymore. We're not there yet, and I don't think we're going to be there. But a lot of the carriers are moving that direction and say, yes, we want to give you coverage, and we know that we're going to pay some claims, but we want to work with you to be and appropriate vendors to be better risk. To mitigate the frequency and severity of those claims.
Okay, awesome.
And one more point to that, Mark, I'm just going to add, this is Mike Nielsen again, just one more point to that question that we got from Lee. I really appreciate that question. I know Mark can't see it, but your point about cyber insurance carriers actually making payments to paying the ransoms to get rid of an exposure. You should be, as the client, you should be involved in those conversations. And I think that's a very important point to make, Mark. Carriers shouldn't go out there and pay those ransoms without deep conversations with the client, the insured, and have those dialogues to see exactly what's the best avenue. And it is, as Mark indicated and alluded to, it is a cost benefit analysis. You know, you have to protect your brand name reputation, you have to protect your assets, but there's also a component of you got to get back to doing business too. But I think the overriding point is that your carrier shouldn't be making that decision in a silo. They should be having those conversations with you as a client and make that determination of what the best result would be. And your broker should be an intermediary to that conversation and making sure that they facilitate that conversation to happen. So those decisions don't get made without you. And I hope that answers your question, Lee.
All right. And another question from Lee was, what do cyber insurance actuarial tables look like? In other words, what metrics are used to assess rates and identify high/low risk insurees?
Yeah, so so we don't get a peek behind the curtain as far as actuarial tables. We understand from carriers, but we do understand what drives rates and and what's a better risk versus a not so good risk. First and foremost, it's going to be size. One of the main data drivers for underwriters is revenue. How big are they? And then also, and really, and the other one is just controls, right? They really want to see what controls you currently have. Again, it goes back to that top five. If you have all those top five controls in place and they seem very adequate, then you're going to get some of the best terms and conditions that's out there.
Awesome. Any other further questions for Mark or Mike before we move on? All right, we got one more. What do cyber insurers in general and USI specifically ask of the customer in the case of incident response? Do you require your own response teams, or can internal IT follow their playbook using their own embedded incident response experts and resources?
Yeah, I think the first point would be, we would want to come in to see if you have a plan in place, and then work, and then we have, like myself, experts to give you advice on that plan and say, okay, here's what we see. And then also, again, carriers work with vendors, and you can also work with David and his group to make sure that plan is robust. So nobody's going to impute their own plan on you. We would want you to come up with your plan that's tailored to your company, that's specific for you guys and your situation, and working with the right experts to make sure it's adequate and it's tested. Hopefully that answers that question.
All right. Well, thanks, Mark. Thanks, Mike. All the folks at USI. I think I saw Tyler hop on earlier.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you very much. We're very appreciative.
Guess I could turn my camera back on here. And let's go ahead and introduce our next speaker. Back up to it. All right, so now we're going to talk Microsoft 365 and kind of the cybersecurity capabilities there. So we're going to have Joey Battlement of Ingram Micro, who is our Microsoft distributor, is going to speak. Joey has been our partner rep for the last couple of years. He's been in IT for over 10 years. He worked for Dell EMC as a data center specialist. He also spent 2 years with another IT partner focusing on private cloud, supporting architects and engineering. He joined Ingram Micro back in 2019 and has been focused on security and collaboration for Microsoft. So, Joey, take it away.
Hey, thanks a lot, David. Great content in your presentation, and and Mark, yours as well. I'll probably throw a couple stats out there around some of the things that you brought up and appropriately protecting your environment. But appreciate you guys having me today, David. Thanks for letting me come on and kind of talk a little bit about what Microsoft's doing in the market and what they're seeing. Hopefully, I think the goal for everyone is to make sure that leveraging the Fulcrum Group and the right tools and security postures, security is there as that safety net, but hopefully, hopefully you don't have to use it. It's one of those things that you hope you never have to use. So, as David said, been in the industry for a while, worked in the data center specifically Had a pretty interesting experience during the explosion of storage. I think we all remember having phones that had 16 gigabytes of no one even knowing how much storage was on their phone, to having 16 gigs and 64, and now phones having a terabyte. So I got to experience that from a storage perspective and a data center perspective. But as I moved on into the new role that I have with Microsoft, really interesting time. I came on November of 2019, and March 2020 hit, and the pandemic changed the world for everyone. And the space that I focus on is really the cybersecurity space. I also do a little bit of collaboration. I've got a counterpart that focuses on collaboration, the platform that we're on today, Teams. But everything that you do has to have that underlying security there to protect you. And so hopefully a couple of things that I'll show you today. Don't have a ton of slides for you. I want it to be kind of an easy presentation and give you the ability to ask any questions that you might have, but a little bit around what we're seeing, what Microsoft is seeing from a global perspective, and then also some of the things that are out there that can that the Fulcrum Group leverages with its customers and end users to make sure that they're kind of protected depending on what vertical or industry or what needs they might have. So kind of to kick it off. And can everyone see my screen okay? David, we good? Yes?
Yes, sir. This looks great.
Great. So, we're in this new era of flux and transformation. I sent an article over to David the other day about, technology is really actually outpacing, everything in the world, and security is one of those aspects. It's challenging to keep up with all of these, new, edge devices, whether it's, tablets or laptops and, the Apple watches and Samsung watches. So it's really challenging because technology is moving so fast, right? Everyone knows technology is, it's a business. The conventional ways of doing security, that worked once upon a time, are not necessarily things that are keeping people protected today. And I use the analogy you guys have probably heard a bunch of times that, years ago, you had your data center and or you had the area where your information resided, which was typically that data center. You could, build a fence around it, like your house. You could put up some firewalls, make sure you had some good antivirus, and you were pretty much protected, right? And with the advent of all of the mobile devices that we have, the iPhones and the Galaxy phones and the tablets and the Surfaces and iPads and things of that nature, it really changed the landscape of conventional security, right? It made it where now data wasn't just being protected behind this fence with your firewalls and your antivirus, but now you have your employees or coworkers or whoever it might be out in the field, or working from home due to the pandemic, or working in some form of a hybrid environment where they're working from an office, they're working from home, maybe they're traveling and checking in on what's happening back at work. So it really has changed the landscape where that conventional way of securing your information and kind of where it goes and what happens with it isn't the world we live in today. The security professionals that are out there, are having a hard time, especially, at those small to medium businesses and at the end user level, right? There's just so much coming at them, and Mark and David talked about it with, spear phishing, your normal phishing, your ransomware, just basic attacks that are being thrown at you every day. One of the stats that I love to throw out is, and Mark really was hitting on this hard, is multi-factor authentication. Probably everyone on the call has had to deal with that in some way, shape, or form, whether it's logging into your Bank of America account or whatever financial institutions you might work with, or paying a car payment, or any type of transaction you might do online. You're getting asked, hey, we want to make sure that you're really you. And multi-factor authentication actually prevents, if it's installed appropriately and leveraged correctly, it actually blocks 96% of the phishing attempts that are put out there day in and day out. So, doing some simple things can really, up your level of security. Enabling some basic security postures can really help you out. Leveraging, experts like, David and Steve and the whole Fulcrum team to make sure that, whatever vertical or industry or whatever needs that the business has, that you're setting up the appropriate postures, really makes it where you can protect the business, you can protect where information goes, what people do with it. Things like Mark mentioned, I hear I'm a cybersecurity expert, and I always tell the story to make fun of myself. I was flying to Redmond to go to the Seattle office and do an executive briefing. I was working on the computer with my laptop, slid it in the back of the seat, got off the plane, no laptop. So I was able to go back and, work with corporate, lock the laptop down. I did get it, but I like to poke fun at myself that, even the people that get paid to know about security can still make mistakes, right? And then, David talked about this quite a bit, the regulatory requirements, right? There's, whether it's things like PCI or things, with HIPAA compliance, things of that nature. And even as far as, GDPR, which is the European version of, kind of how they protect privacy for businesses and individuals. There are a lot of areas where you want to make sure that you're in compliance and not exposing yourself to any type of fines or challenges from that perspective. So just kind of a high level overview of, where we are, in the world today. And I think everyone's probably felt some challenge from a cybersecurity perspective. I told the story, my stepmom got a call from someone saying they were from Delta Federal or Delta Credit Union, and they needed her password to get into her bank account. And, she just didn't know any better. She, gave it out, and they ended up taking all the money out of her bank account. So, everyone I think has felt it in some way, shape, or form, whether they've had a family member that's been had some sort of malicious activity happen to them, or they've been part of a business, right? So definitely one of the major hurdles and challenges out there in the market today, and I think everyone's feeling it, whether you're an individual or a business owner. As we look at some of the things that we've seen from a Microsoft perspective, I think David touched on this in his presentation. Is most people that I encounter think that it's the Targets of the world and Southwest Airlines, and that it's the large enterprise organizations that are the ones that are the breaches are focused on, right? And it's actually, not really the case. The statistics show that it's like 58%, and here it's, it's like 50% of small businesses have experienced an attack in the past year, right? And one of the reasons that happens is, as I mentioned earlier, the small to medium business and even that commercial space really don't have the IT staff, the technical capability or wherewithal to set up those appropriate security postures, right? An example, someone was fooled by an email from the CEO. I know David hit on this a little bit. Hey, go buy the iTunes gift cards. I actually had that happen when I was working for a partner in Charlotte, North Carolina. I had someone send me an email, looked just like my owner's email. There was like one little change in the signature, going into a meeting, don't call me, go buy, on your corporate card, go buy $10,000 of, credit cards. So, that's just an example. I think you'll probably hear, a couple times over. One of the other stats that we like to talk about is, 61% of the businesses that had an attack weren't prepared and were actually taken down, right? When I was working in the partner space in Charlotte, with architects and engineers, I had a customer that one of his employees came in, early on a Friday, wanted to get ahead of the day, get some work done, and clicked on an email at like 6:15 in the morning, not thinking anything of it. And 45 minutes later, we realized that something wrong was, something malicious was going on inside the environment. Everything was, their entire environment was locked down with ransomware. Luckily we had a plan in place for backup and recovery, and we were able to, they didn't have to pay the ransom, and we were able to recover, all of that data. The challenge was it took us 3 days to do it, right? We had to go back in and we had to create all the images for, for all the different employees, whether it was a C-level person, an engineer, a salesperson, an architect. Everyone has kind of their own unique image that, they have the right applications and the ability to, to do their job. So that cost him $160,000. You see here, the average SMB when they're breached, it's costing them 149K. And I think David, you might have mentioned something right in that neighborhood, 150, 155,000. But it's averaging about $150,000. When an SMB is breached, whether they're paying the ransomware, whether they're not paying it, and it's hey, in the case that I mentioned about when I was in Charlotte. That company was down for 3 days. They had to pay all of their employees. They couldn't move projects forward. They couldn't bill. So, it could be paying the ransomware, or it could just be the cost of being out of business for, several days, weeks, months. It could even put you out of business, right? So, little thing here where someone got the CEO's password, because what typically will happen is someone will get inside of that network and they'll kind of sit and just watch what's going on, and they'll wait for an opportunity, to strike, right? And in this instance, they sent an email, from the CFO saying we need a $40,000 wire transfer, and the money was transferred and gone, right? So, definitely some challenges and some severe consequences out there. I wanted to share a little bit around some of the numbers, because I spend all day, every day working with partners and end users on, what are the challenges and how do we hopefully prevent a lot of those challenges or mitigate them as possible, right? One other slide I like to show is just a little bit about the backdrop with COVID-19 related cyber attacks, right? We saw just a 10x, an exponential growth in cyber attacks once COVID happened, really due to everyone being forced to move home and have that work from home environment. Are they working on a secure network? What type of device are they working on? So we saw a lot of malicious activity. It was really interesting. The number one targeted group, during the pandemic were actually realtors. And the reason being that, they typically aren't working from, inside of an office every day, that, they're out in the field showing houses. A lot of them have home offices. And what was happening, or what is happening, is these malicious actors would get inside of the network or get inside of that person's device, and they would sit back and wait for someone. I'm a new home owner. I just bought a house in January. They would wait for the realtor or the mortgage broker, title company, whatever it might be. Hey, wire us that $50,000 to this. Transacted to this area so that we can go ahead and close. Well, when they wire that 50,000, it's actually, going to ISIS or whatever, bad malicious actor it is. And that was actually the number one, targeted area. But, we just saw this huge exponential growth. COVID-19 exploited malicious cyber actors, groups of cyber criminals targeting individuals, whether it's the small to medium space, enterprise, large organizations, just pushing out scams and phishing emails over and over again. WHO reported a 5-fold increase in cyber attacks. Since the start of the pandemic, WHO seen a dramatic increase in the number of cyber attacks, directed at staff. They're really looking to find the weak link from an employee perspective, right? They're not necessarily looking to break into, the cloud or the data center. They're just looking for that individual that's busy or clicks on an email and isn't thinking about it and moves along. Kind of a great example of this is, there was an end user out there, Northwind Traders. Employee receives an email with a link for, to a secure document. They just double click it and open it up. Thinking it's from a well-known organization, enter their credentials to view the document. Document doesn't load. They're busy. They've got other things going on. They move on and forget to even check. Well, the next thing they know, they've been phished. Now their environment's been breached, and they've got that bad actor in there, right? So it was essentially a phishing attack. They were just delivered their username and password, so they've given that hacker the ability to get into the network and then kind of spread across the network and try to find their way into an admin's right, so that they can really control what's going on. And they kind of lay in wait, as I mentioned, looking for when's the best opportunity to to kind of attack, right? And we've seen a 250% increase in phishing emails, since December of 2018, and that's a worldwide number. One of the things I'll show you in a couple slides is, one of the cool things from a Microsoft perspective is really their view of what's going on globally with all the different, technologies that they have. But, it's, kind of harping on some of the things that David talked about and some of the things that Mark talked about. It's, it's happening every day. I work for a large corporation, and they try to phish me, once or twice a month. They send me emails all the time, and if they don't look right, I have to report them as phishing, and, hopefully I get it right more often than not. But I've been caught a couple times and had to go into training to, really understand, hey, you've got to look at where these emails are coming from. You've got to make sure that they're the right email. If you're not sure, pick up the phone, call that person, or report it to IT and make sure that they can, make sure it's a safe, document or safe attachment. So, a little bit about, what I see in the world from, from the perspective of, partners like the Fulcrum Group, right? As we've moved into this really challenging cybersecurity space, what I've seen is, 89% of, SMB customers, are saying, security is like a paramount thing. Or, this is a really big challenge. We don't want to be the next, the next company that's, ransomware and, either has to pay, that 6-figure plus, ransomware, or, we don't want to have to go back and have to, rebuild the business essentially, right? And this is where I think, partners, and companies like the Fulcrum Group come in. 90% of the SMBs that, that are out in the market would consider hiring a new managed service provider, right? They're, one that's really doing security right, that are making sure that they're doing assessments on what's going on inside the environment, that they're using the best practices, that are recommended, whether it be, from the government or, in the IT community, or from the vendors like Microsoft and Amazon, and, the guys that are really analyzing, leveraging artificial intelligence and machine learning, right? So, you leveraging someone like David and Steve and the Fulcrum Group and their team, making sure that they're going in and they're identifying what's happening today, right, in your world and in your environment, and then what do we need to do to make sure that we're setting you up in the best manner possible to protect you from, maybe from yourself or from someone, that's really focusing in on trying to, breach your business and do some bad stuff. And again, this statistic comes up over and over again. It's really the challenge around not having that in-house IT expertise to really stay up to date with the technology that's out there, right? Making sure that, as technology keeps growing exponentially, and we keep getting new iPhones, new devices, and new mobile devices, that we can manage, how data is being protected on those devices, right? So, a lot of the SMBs out there just aren't equipped to manage that IT environment. That's where guys like David and Steve and the Fulcrum Group come in, making sure that they do have the right expertise, that they've got the resources, and that they can make sure that you guys can sleep well at night and keep running the business. Now, one of the things that's really cool from a Microsoft perspective, that I work with David and Steve a lot is, there's a free tool that Microsoft offers to its partners and end users, and it's called Secure Score. I didn't want to dive into too deeply and confuse anyone, but what essentially, as I mentioned, it's free, and it's a tool that you can go in and you can see today, where Microsoft grades you from a security perspective. They actually give you a score, and they say that today, and this is just a kind of an example slide. Today, you may not have multi-factor authentication enabled at all, or it may not be enabled for everyone across the organization. We see that a lot where, maybe there's 50 or 100 people, in the company, maybe there's 10 or 20 in the company, and 10 of them have multi-factor authentication enabled and 10 don't, right? So this is something that can give you two really cool pieces of information. It can tell you, where are you today, right? Here's how Microsoft would grade you from a security score perspective. Then what you can do is you can run a 48-hour lightweight kind of assessment on your internal Microsoft environment, and it'll come back and it'll say, okay, here's where you were 2 days ago, and here are some recommendations that you can do right now today, with your partner like the Fulcrum Group. Hey, we only have 10 of 20 people that have multi-factor authentication enabled. We would recommend we just make that a policy across the board. Everyone has to have it enabled. Everyone has to be using it, right? But it gives you, as you can see here, and I'll pull my mouse up so you can see that, here's your kind of your initial score, right? And then as we run through and we do that 48-hour lightweight assessment, it's showing, that there are some, 63 different things that you might want to address. There may be, maybe you're using a different form of multi-factor authentication. So you've said, hey, we don't need to use, Microsoft's version because we're using, Cisco's Duo MFA. But it shows you some really cool stuff around, here are some things that we need to address. We need to, block credential stealing. We need to use advanced threat protection against ransomware. We need to block execution of, potentially obfuscated scripts. So it gives you some things that it thinks you should address, sooner than later. And it shows you a little bit of kind of breakdown by different points of like identity security, device management, application management. There's a lot out there that you can look at. Where is the data coming from? Who is it coming from? What type of application is it trying to use? But it's a really cool tool that it's free. It's a way that you can see, hey, how well are we doing today? And then you can get some simple recommendations on some security postures that you might want to enforce or set up so that you can be better protected. And the really neat thing is once you go in and you run that secure score, once you have, David and Steve and the team go ahead and address, whatever concerns that it kind of comes back to you, you can rerun that score and you see the improvement. So you see that your score will go up from, a 46% to like a 92%. So you can actually see a tangible result that, hey, we went in and we addressed these 4 or 5 or 6 or 10 different recommendations and rerun that security score assessment. And then you can see, hey, you can actually see a tangible result. So it's nice, in this world of IT and, all of, these things floating around, it's nice to be able to go in and say, okay, here's where we are today. Here's what we need to do. And then you can go back and actually see that it made an impact, in your security posture and protecting the business. So really cool tool. David and Steve and I use it all the time. We run it on, I would think we run on almost every customer that they work with to make sure that, they're getting a good baseline. And then there's, of course, some more advanced assessments that David and the team run depending on the need of the customer. So I mentioned earlier that, I wanted to talk a little bit about Microsoft's, kind of vantage point on security. And this is probably my favorite slide, excuse me, when I present, because when I started working for Microsoft and started working, in the cybersecurity space, I never realized the view that Microsoft has globally with all of the different applications, and tools that they have, right? So they have 300 billion users active, user activities profiled and analyzed in 2019, 2.3 billion endpoint vulnerabilities, discovered a day. 11 billion malicious and suspicious messages were blocked in 2019, 12 billion cloud activities inspected and monitored and controlled in 2019. I start with those numbers because I love the middle of this slide where, I didn't realize, using things like, Bing, or Windows, I should say, 1.2 billion plus, transactions are happening on Windows, Azure, the Microsoft cloud, there's a billion things being analyzed inside of Azure. One of the things, I have an Xbox and didn't even think about 65 million users, globally, playing video games and leveraging Xbox, right? 470 billion plus emails analyzed. So just tons of different platforms and transactions that give Microsoft, probably the broadest view of what's happening globally. And the really neat thing is all of the different data centers, around the world that Microsoft has and all of the platforms that they have, they're sharing that data, right? So if they see something on Xbox or Bing or in Outlook with email, they might see an email come in to, the company I work for and say, hold on, this is a malicious email. We're going to now share this across the entire, Microsoft spectrum. They might see someone playing Xbox and, something malicious happen, with someone, internationally or globally with an Xbox playing a video game. They're going to share that across the entire, platform that Microsoft has. So that was something that kind of blew me away. When I saw, man, it's not just, you're opening up your Outlook, calendar and sending emails, right? There's so much more that's being analyzed, in real time with machine learning and AI. And then it's being, something's happening in Europe, we know about it in America. If something's happening in, Asia, we know about it, and, it's being shared across the, the entire world. So something really cool that I like to show people, because I think it's some of the numbers, I'm old enough to know when a million was a lot. And a million doesn't seem like a lot anymore. It seems like, a billion has replaced a million in the new world. So I kind of think that the numbers just, to me are mind blowing. And kind of to close it out, one of the things that, David and Steve and the Fulcrum team, that we focus on and kind of the solution that Microsoft brought to market is a SKU called Microsoft 365 Business Premium, right? In the past, Microsoft had kind of come up with an offering that was an aggregate of several different solutions. And about 18 months ago, maybe 24 months ago now, they basically built a SKU, or a license, I should say, Business Premium, that was designed for the SMB space, designed for end users or customers that have 300 users or below. And what they did is they took a bunch of their enterprise security and collaboration features, along with the things that people use every day, PowerPoint, Outlook, Word, Excel, and they brought it down into an SMB price point and really focused it on the SMB space. They built it for that SMB marketplace. Even the version of Windows, you get a different version of Windows. I believe it's Windows Pro, in that Business Premium license. Most of the people that I work with, or I would say a good chunk of the people that I work with, are typically used to using, your Microsoft Business Standard. That gets you, all of the productivity apps, your Excel, your PowerPoint, your Word, all of the things that you use every day at work. And that's typically been, what we see in the market. But what we're seeing is a huge push into that Business Premium SKU, because, for, $8.50 more, you get, probably $50-$60, worth of tools, whether it be things for identity management, self-service passwords, whether you get things like tools. A really cool tool is Microsoft Intune. That helps you manage your mobile devices. There's a mobile device management feature and a mobile application management feature within the tool, within Intune. That allows you as business owners to allow your employees to, either you can give them a device, right? I have a corporately issued laptop, but I still use my personal phone. And with Intune, you're allowed to manage the corporate owned device. You manage the entire device, everything that's going on. You can lock it, you can delete it, you can wipe it. With my personal device, Intune manages all of the corporate applications and manages my Outlook, my Teams, anything that's a corporate application, so that if something happens to the device, or if I was to leave the organization, they have the ability to wipe and lock down any of that information, so I can't do something with it that I shouldn't do. It even gives you the ability to manage things like, you can't even screenshot data. You can't. I use a great story with my engineer. He was going on vacation. He wanted to move data from his laptop to his iPad because he wanted to, work while he was on vacation. It blocked him from moving corporate data onto that personal device. So a bunch of really cool features, as you can see, kind of highlighted here in the blue. With Windows Defender for antivirus, the multi-factor authentication that you've heard a bunch of times. A lot of stuff that Fulcrum leverages to make sure that they're protecting their end users and their customers. So one of the call outs that you'll kind of see the last slide I have is hopefully you're on Microsoft today. If you haven't done that, it's a world-class leading platform for collaboration, security, productivity. Migrating to business premium or potentially M365 E3, depending on the size of the organization or some of the needs. You've heard it over and over again. Making sure that you've got MFA, making sure that not only do you have it, but it's set up and it's implemented across the organization and it's set up correctly. And then, leveraging the tools that are out there like SecureScore to make sure that those security postures are, you know where you need to improve, and you can come up with a plan to do that. So hopefully we saved the best for last, and you guys enjoyed the content that I had for you. But Dave, Jeremy, team, if there's any questions or thoughts, fire away. And I'll take a breath.
Awesome presentation. Great stuff there. So far, we hadn't had any questions come up, I don't think, but does anybody have any questions about Microsoft 365, any of the licensing plans or anything that
I saw Martha take a note, so she's ready for the test at the end of the session. So I appreciate that.
Right. Well, if there are no questions for Joey, are there any other questions that have popped up about any of the presentations or anything else that might have jogged a thought into your mind today? We covered a lot of content. We'll be sharing all the presentations and the recording. But are there any final questions that people had?
Dave, I just have a question. This is Derek. I want to talk to you a little more when we meet regarding our assessment. I want to talk to you a little more about the insuring aspects and find out where we are with that, and also a little more about that 365 we talked about now that we've had an opportunity to look at this. So that's about it.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Well, we'll definitely make that happen. Awesome. Great question. All right. Laverne says it was helpful and informative. All right. Jared says thanks to everyone involved. Any other final questions? All right. If not, then we will jump over to the Amazon gift card giveaway. So I got Jeremy's credit card, and I bought 3 Amazon gift cards. Oh, he didn't know? Oh, I thought he knew about it. Okay. You can put it on your expense report for next year.
It was an email. It said David Johnson said run to Target real quick.
Yeah, there you go. See?
Very urgent.
All right. Well, let's look at our list here. We picked out some winners. All right. First up, first winner of a $100 Amazon gift card is Chris Mitchell of MMC Group. Chris, are you still with us? Thought I saw him on the list earlier.
Yep, he shows to be in the meeting.
All right. Excellent. Chris, we will get that emailed over to you. Congrats to Chris. All right. Second winner is Jennifer Pitts of Recovery Resource Council. Is Jennifer still here?
Yes. Yay. Thank you.
Yeah, there she is. All right. Congratulations to Jennifer. All right. There's our second winner. And our third winner is Todd Statfield of Success Group International. Is Todd still here? Oh, there he goes. He had just a question about the recording. Yes, Todd, I will actually post the video to our YouTube channel, and you'll be able to share it right from there. So, All right. So those were all three of our winners. Congratulations again to all of our winners. Your Amazon gift card will be emailed to you there. So, all right. Jeremy, you want to give us a quick wrap up, and we can actually get done a little early here today. So,
yeah, thank you everyone for attending. Absolutely. Talked to many of you before, and just wanted you to know that we'll be reaching out over the next couple of days. So definitely wanted to follow up and see what your take was on this event. Also get ideas on future events, so we'll know what to share in the future as far as an educational process. Good luck with the rest of the fourth quarter, or what's coming up as the fourth quarter and the rest of 2021, and enjoy the rest of your day and stay safe out there.
yeah, and a couple other things. If you have interest in talking to the USI folks on the cybersecurity, let me know. I'll actually include their information in my follow-up email, so you can reach out to them directly as well. So we'll make sure to make that available to you. We'll make all the presentations available to you and the video as well. So feel free to reach out if you got any questions. Thanks everyone for an awesome event, and everybody's going to get 15 minutes of their day back, which I know is always a good thing in these busy days. So
thanks everyone.
Thanks guys. Thanks for having us. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.